What's up? So, anybody else like fire? Yeah. That's a weird thing to say that you like. I'm a little nervous now. Okay, yeah, but I like fire. I love candles. I always like to have a candle burning. I don't know what it is, just the smell, the flame, all that. It's warm. Some of you are cold right now, and it's warming up my hand a little bit. Actually, one of my favorite things is when it's cold outside, and we have a fire in the fireplace, right? And there's just that warm and that crackle, the crackle. And then I get on the couch, and I cuddle with my wife and watch a movie. That's perfect, all right? No, but I do. I love the fire in the fireplace. I love candles. Fire's pretty cool. You know something that is, in a lot of ways, similar to fire? What? Yeah, there it is. Sex. Sex. Like, oh, boy. Here we go. Okay, yeah, sex. Here's what I mean by that. Okay, let me be specific. Here's the thing about fire. When fire is in a candle, it's pretty good. Okay, this is awesome. When it's in a fireplace, that's great. If I was to take fire and light someone's hair on fire, okay, that would be painful. That would not be good. That would be painful. Fire in your fireplace warms the house. Fire in other places in the house is very destructive, right? If your house is on fire, it's going to be warm, but that's not good, okay? It's extremely, extremely destructive. And it turns out that fire is great when it is in the right location, okay? When it's outside of that and in other areas, it can be extremely dangerous, extremely destructive, and extremely painful. And so, we're talking about fire, but we're talking about sex. And that's going to make you uncomfortable. You're going to be uncomfortable all night long. But just imagine being me and having to do this in front of all of you. All right, so anyways, yeah, we're going to talk about this. And here's the thing, and I'm just going to be real up front about kind of what we're talking about here. And that is, this may be a little bit different than what you've been taught, and maybe what you've heard, and maybe even different than what you've heard in church, but definitely different than what you've heard in culture. In fact, there's a lot of different things that you may have heard about this topic. In fact, I remember the first thing I ever heard, the first time I ever heard this word, and I was 5 years old, and I still remember it, because I remember what the person said. This is what she said. She said, sex is bad. That was the first thing I heard about sex, was somebody said, sex is bad. And so here I am, 5 years old. This is all I know about this thing. I don't know what it is. All I know is that it's bad at 5 years old. And I get older, and you start learning more things. And I remember when I was in school, they had this guy come do an assembly, like to talk to us. And you're going to think I'm making this up. His name was Ed, okay? So he called himself Sex Ed, okay? And so he came and he taught on this, and he had pictures of gonorrhea and herpes and all this. And so I was like, oh. And so I learned, in school that sex is gross, right? And then I learned another thing because he said, oh, and by the way, there's AIDS, and AIDS can kill you. So I learned that sex will kill you, okay? When I was a kid. And then I went to church, and I learned, they said sex is gross, sex is bad, so save it for your wife. That's pretty much what I heard. And basically the attitude, no one said this specifically, but what I gathered from what I heard was that God hates sex, okay? So this is kind of what I grew up in, and maybe some of you had something similar. What if I told you that these are the wrong things to think about this topic? Then there's another set of things you may have heard, and this comes from a different source, and that is maybe people saying things like this: everyone is having sex. Right? Now, this is kind of strange to me, because you hear both sides. Some people say oh man, it's no big deal. It's not a big deal. I mean, people act like it's this big deal. Don't make it a big deal. And then they're like, oh, you're not doing it? It's a huge deal. Why aren't you? Suddenly it's a big deal. It's not a big deal. I don't know. But everyone's doing it, even though that's not true at all. Sex has no consequences. That's another thing you may kind of hear people kind of act like, oh, that stuff they talk about that doesn't really happen. And, okay, as long as you're safe, there's nothing else you have to worry about. They don't think about the emotional side or the spiritual side or anything. That they'll say has no consequence. And it's only physical. I mean, come on. It's like ping pong. Just a fun game to play, okay? It's like a good dessert, right? Makes you feel good. You want to have it as often as possible, okay? That's what people act like, all right? That's a lot of the attitude here. And here's the same thing. Okay, I want to make sure, for any of you that are taking pictures of this to post to your parents, okay, This is not the way we want to think either. Mom, look what he said. Okay, yeah. No. Okay, because here's what this is the truth. We all actually know this, that sex is not only physical. In fact, if you're honest with yourself, even if you don't believe anything the Bible says about, or even Christianity would say about sex, you would know that this is true, that it's not just physical. I mean, because if it was just physical, then how come when a child is sexually abused, it often causes so many problems all through their life? So much different than any other abuse. If it's just physical, then why is rape so much worse and so much more emotionally damaging for a woman than physical abuse? Because it's more than that. How come every time, I can't even think of an exception. Someone came to me and said, I got to tell you something I've never told anyone in my life, and I don't know how to get past this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if God will forgive me. And the next words that come out of their mouth are always something to do with sex. Because it's more than physical. There's an emotional and a spiritual side to it. And I want to also talk about one other of the myths that I read a while ago, and that is this, that God hates sex. A lot of people think this, that God hates it, but here's the truth. God created sex. It was his idea. In fact, if you believe in creation, like that God created the heavens and the earth and all that, that means at some point along the way he goes, I got an idea, okay? And he had this idea, and it was his idea, and he created it. And when he created it, though, and this is so important, that he created it to be a blessing, but it's only a blessing when it's done in the place that he created it for. Outside of that, it is extremely destructive and painful and causes so many problems in our lives. So we want to learn what he created and why he created it, and how that we can protect what he created. So this is in Genesis chapter 2. Now this is the very beginning of the Bible, okay? But this is another neat thing. See, this isn't just here and then forget about it. Jesus himself quoted this. And a guy named Peter heard it, and he told it to a guy named Mark who wrote it down for us. So Jesus said this in the book of Mark. And then Paul, who talked a lot about how to live as a Christian, wrote this exact same thing down to remind us. This is God's intention for this area of our life. It was from the very beginning, he made it clear. He said, a man will leave his father and mother and be united. You know what he's talking about? Okay, be united with his wife, and they will become one flesh. Say one flesh. Okay, that's right. At least I didn't make you say sex. Okay, one flesh, okay? They're going to be one flesh. That's something special. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, so I wanted you to notice that. I just wanted to show you the next verse. And then he says, the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. This is talking about Adam and Eve. And here's something that's important for you to know. I want you to know this. When it comes to what God created, when it comes to sex, there is no shame. And yet what so many people experience in this area is shame. There's no fear of comparison. Oh, what are they going to think about me? Are they thinking about who they were with? They're thinking about this thing they saw. There's no fear of comparison in what God created. No fear of STDs or pregnancy. That's not a part of what he created. There's no guilt. Oh, I shouldn't have done that to her. I shouldn't have done that to him. I shouldn't have pushed her like that. I wish I wouldn't have. There's no regret in what he created. There's none of that. That is all part of when it gets out of what he has created for us. So there's none of that. That is not in what he has created for us. Now, then he said it was this. He said one flesh. One flesh. What is one flesh? This is something that is amazing that God does. He says that when two people come together and they have sex, they get married and they have sex, that they become one flesh. And by the way, you don't have to be married for that to happen, because he created sex to unite two people. It is something spiritually that God does. You know, now scientists are finally figuring out that there's actually something chemically that happens in the brain, that there's chemicals that are released that bind you to the person that you're with. And he created it, though, to unite two people. And so one of the biggest problems is that people don't understand and won't talk about. They talk about maybe the physical consequences, things that can happen, but they don't talk about this, that when two people are together and then they separate, that there is something that is left behind. There is something that happens emotionally, and it can affect you for years and years to come. It can affect future relationships. It can do so much damage, which is why we want to talk about this. Because God created something for you, and the rules that he has is for protecting what he created. Not keeping from you, protecting what he created. And that's a different way of thinking than most people think about this topic. So as I was getting ready to do this, I kept thinking about okay, you know, what I could talk about. And the tendency is I want to spend the next, whatever how long we have, 20 minutes, just trying to convince you and show you all the things that can go wrong if you get this outside of what he created, and how great it can be if you do what he said. But I don't want to do that because that's a waste of time if this is true. If you're a believer, okay, do you believe that God loves you? Okay. Do you believe that he wants good for you? Okay. Do you believe that his commands are for your good? Okay. So then we shouldn't even have to talk about it if you're a believer anymore as to why you should. Because you know what he has said. That sex is for one man, one woman in marriage, and that's what he's designed it for. And if I'm a believer and I really trust him, then that's not even a question. The question now becomes, how do I actually do that? Because knowing something, what to do and how to do it are two different things. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like, how many of you have stolen something in your life? A candy bar, anything? Anybody? Come on, don't lie. Yeah, okay. How many of you have lied in your lifetime? Anybody? Okay. Now, if I can name a few others and we make sure we got everybody, but here's the point. You all knew that stealing was wrong, and you all knew that lying was wrong. And if we go through the list, we can all find things that we knew were wrong and we did anyways. Because knowing and accomplishing are two different things, so I want to mostly help you accomplish. Now, if you're not a believer, I do want to just ask you to do something. And I hope that someday you will come to the understanding of the love of God in your life and how much he wants good things for you. And this stuff will come alive to you. But at least do this. At least just get online and look at the statistics of how the way culture is treating sex is damaging and hurting people's lives. It will absolutely blow your mind. Just a couple of these. Did you know that 50 to 60% of married men cheat on their spouses? And 45 to 50% of women cheat on their spouses. According to the American Psychological Association, about 40% of divorces were based on infidelity. That means cheating on one another. And let's see, 56%. This is none of these are Christian things, by the way, if this is curious to you. According to the American Academy of Matrimony Lawyers, they reported that, I didn't know there was that. They reported that 56% of their divorce cases involving one of the parties having an obsessive interest in pornography. 50%, a lot of marriages wrecked. 1 in 6 boys and 1 in 4 girls is sexually abused before they're 18. 1 in 4 teenagers will contract a sexually transmitted disease this year. 3 in 10 American girls will get pregnant before they turn 20. Now, I mean, no. Okay, I could just read statistics. Okay, what we can see is that things are not working in this area. And in fact, you could really recognize that and this was not going to happen, but if the world would just say, okay, just for a little while, we're going to do what the Bible says about this area. We're going to do what God has said about this area. If just for a little while, think of what would happen. All of these divorces that wouldn't have happened. All of these families that would have stayed together. The financial change that would make in the world. The difference it would make in the kids' lives who get to have parents. Then we're talking about all kinds of other things. You know, STDs would be wiped out. That's $18 billion in medical expenses every single year in our country that wouldn't happen. I mean, on and on and on and on. Why? Just from this one thing that God talked about. This one thing that he created for us. That gets so messed up and causes so much harm. But for those of you that are a believer, this is what we're going to do. And if you're not a believer, this is what I maybe encourage you. Listen to these things because they will change your life. And I want to talk to you about how to protect this thing that he created. So, I know that this is important because of a conversation that I've had with many of you. I do this thing, it's kind of mean. I'll acknowledge that it's mean. And some of you guys are going to avoid me from this day on now that I tell you what I do. But I find guys who've been in a relationship for a long time in our youth group, and if I can ever get along with them, and like we're sitting on a bench or something at camp, I've done this at camp a lot, fall retreat and places like that because you get moments, and I'll sit down and say, hey, you've been dating this person for a while, and they're like, yeah. It's like, how's that going? Like, oh, it's really good, And then I look at them and I say, and how's it going physically? And a lot of times this is what happens. Their head goes, it's really hard. And they won't look at me anymore. And this is what I say. I know. I understand. Because I was a teenager. And I went through the same things. See, I started dating a girl. We became boyfriend, girlfriend. We were friends for like 2 weeks, and then we jumped right to here, okay? And if you were here last week and you remember some of this talk, okay? We became boyfriend, girlfriend right away. And it was, there was no struggles. There was nothing early on. But eventually we started the whole kissing thing and doing all that. And then something happens inside. And it's something I didn't expect to happen because I was a kid who was following Jesus and loved him with all my heart, and that's all I want to do. But something what I would call a burning inside. Something began to burn, okay? And in fact, the reason I call it that is because that's what Paul, okay, who talks a lot about how we can handle this, what he said about it. He said this, he says, but if they cannot control themselves, talking about single people, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So he got this burning that's inside, and he says, hey, this is what you do. You get married. And now you're going, wait a minute. If this is the solution to the burning with passion, I'm in trouble. I'm 16. I can't get married, right? You got to give me a better option, Paul, okay? That's what I should do? Okay, but I'm doing this and I can't do that. Okay, so then what? And so that kind of made me start some wheels turning, and I'll give us some other ideas, but I do want us to at least think about one thing. And I'm going to tell you this, even though you're going to ignore it and not listen to it. And the reason I know you're going to ignore it and not listen to it is because that's what I did when I was your age, okay? Someone told me this very thing when I was a sophomore, and I ignored it for about a year and a half before I finally realized that they knew what they were talking about. And so you can do that, but I hope that maybe you'll at least think about it. And that is this, okay, you would all probably recognize that you are not here yet. In fact, for many of you, this is years away. But like some of you would say, I want to graduate college and maybe get a job. So you're looking at what, 25, if in best case, earliest case. So if you're 15, that's 10 years. That's a long time to sit in this and not struggle, okay? So maybe, this is all I'm going to say, just maybe you should consider whether or not this is the stage that you're ready for now. Just thinking out loud. See, what someone encouraged me was to stop hurrying into this and to not worry about that, because there will be plenty of time for this time later, okay? Just something to think about, just throwing that out there, okay? So, this doesn't help us, does it? Because, well, other than maybe realizing we're not ready for some of this, but because I can't get married now. So what do I do if I'm burning with passion? And so he does have another option for us. Yes, okay, another option. And it's one chapter before, in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, he says this, flee from sexual immorality. Do you know what flee means? Run, okay, imagine a house is on fire, what you would do if you were inside, okay? Oh, I think I'll hang out and see how hot it gets. Okay, no, you're gonna flee, you're gonna run, that's what you do. So he's talking about fleeing from sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is anything that is outside God's plan and God's design. That's sexual immorality. So he says flee from it. So what does fleeing look like? How do we do that? And how do we leverage that to help us in this area? So of course, the question that always comes up, this is what people always ask, and they want to know, and that is, well, how far is too far? I mean, like, okay, I understand that maybe, sex is too far, okay? But there's a lot of other stuff between, like, holding hands and sex, okay? So, like, how far, like, if I'm way over here, okay, and I'm, like, side-hugging girls, okay, like, how far between here, like, what is the line? Like, how far can I go before I'm here, okay? And so there's a reason people ask this, though, and if you approach the question wrong, you actually hurt yourself. And this is what most people do. They want someone to give you, like, a line, a barricade, or something to say, that's too far, this thing, whatever this thing is going to be, okay? And then what they want to do is, okay, so I can't touch there, I can't do whatever, So what you want to do is get as close to that line as possible, right? So here's the line. Yeah, I got as much of that. I'm being careful what I do with my hands. Okay, I want to do as much of the line as possible as long as I don't cross the line. Now let me ask you just one question. If right past here is sexual immorality, okay, does this look like fleeing to you? Okay, this is like flirting, not fleeing. Okay, this is the opposite of fleeing. This is getting as close to as I can. And if you have a line, the point in the line would be to get as far away, oh, I don't want to get anywhere near that. Like, oh, I started to get close. No. Okay, it is to get away from that, not to get close to that. And as long as you approach it as, oh, good, he gave me that line. Now I know what all I can do. You were going to have problems, because the same thing will happen to you that's happened to every other person who did that. You'll be right up against that line, and one day you're going to go, oops, my hand slipped. Oh, mind of its own. Okay, I don't know all the stupid things people say. And you go, I'm sorry, we're never going to do that again. We're never going to, okay, we're going to, Jesus, I'm sorry. And you go, I'm never going to do it again and all that. And then, oops. And you know what? Nothing bad happened. And I'm tired of feeling a little guilty about it. In fact, I kind of like it. In fact, it made me feel closer to you, because, the one flesh thing starts to kick in. So we move the line. And now we've got a new line to flirt with. And and now we moved the line. And before you know it, we're kind of tired of a line anyways, and we just ignore it and move completely on. And so that is not how we handle this. And so if we're going to say how far is too far, and I may get into a little bit of specifics in a minute, but here is what Jesus would say is too far. Lust. Lust is too far. And the reason I know that's what he would say is because one day he was talking about a type of sexual immorality. He said, hey, you've heard don't commit adultery. That's cheating on somebody, on your spouse with somebody else or with somebody else's spouse. He says, you've heard that, right? And we're like, yeah, I got it. Well, you know that. Don't do that. This is what he then says. But I tell you, anyone who looks lustfully at a woman has already committed adultery in his heart. So your average person will go, okay, the line here when it comes to that is, okay, don't sleep with somebody else's wife. He's like, hey, don't even look at them lustfully. Well, you mean I can sin this way without even touching somebody? Yeah. Lust is too far. Lust is the line that I want to stay away from. Now that doesn't sound very helpful maybe to you because like, okay, but what does that mean? Okay, like how do I do that? And so what I want to do is I want to show you just a couple ideas, things that you can do to protect yourself and keep yourself from going to a place that God didn't intend you to do, to protect this thing that he has. So what I would ask you to do is to write these things down because many of you are not in a relationship right now, but someday you will be. And when you are in one, these will be very important for you in your life. If you are in a relationship right now, these are very important for you to protect what God has created for you. So let's talk about these things, and they're going to help you a lot. Number one, avoid the rush to be physical. Avoid the rush to be physical. There's this attitude that a lot of people have, and that is this. As soon as we become boyfriend, girlfriend, that means we got to start kissing, right? Like, that's what they got to do. They're my girlfriend. They got to kiss me. That's their responsibility. Okay, no, it's not. They're not yours. Okay, but, and that thing is they just rush right into doing things physical. But let me talk to you about a couple problems with that. The point of dating is to, do you remember the word we used? Evaluate. Oh, good. Y'all make me feel good. Y'all remembered something. Okay. Yeah, the point of this right here especially is for evaluating. To evaluating whether or not this is the person we want to marry. And as soon as you introduce physical things, the evaluation process falls all apart. It becomes all about making out and not about figuring out whether or not this is the person I want to marry. And all of a sudden, emotional things and all these things that go on in your head when you start getting into physical things happen, and it messes up your ability to evaluate. In fact, the conversation I have had with people just a little older than you, in their 20s, they'll say things like this, and I've had multiple conversations like this where it's like, yeah, I was in a relationship that I knew was wrong for me. I knew it was not a good relationship, but I couldn't get out of it because of the physical stuff we were doing. They said this, okay? It was like something was holding on to me and I couldn't let go. And they knew they were in a bad relationship but couldn't get out. Why? Because there's a connection that was happening. They were just connected to this thing, and it was because of the physical stuff that they were doing. And it kept them from actually evaluating and doing what they were supposed to do. So you're thinking, okay, but like, can you kiss them? Right? So here we go. Ready? Kissing is not a sin. So we're like, yes. Okay, that's the only thing you're going to hear me say the rest of the night. You're not going to hear, yes, he says it's not a sin. Okay, now here's what I want to say, though. Kissing is not a sin, but you can sin while kissing. Okay? Now, see, when I was your age, someone on a platform similar to this said, kissing is not a sin. And I don't know what they said after because I was like, sweet. Because now I know I can kiss my girlfriend and not have any guilt. And so what I did was I just kissed as much as possible because that's not a sin. Now, when I got a little older, I looked back at what I was doing and I realized that the entire time I was doing that, especially, when we were making out and things, was lusting after her. Now, I told myself, I'm just kissing, it's not a sin. But there was so much lust. And if you will look in your heart and what's going on in there, you will find so much of the time what is true in you. And asking yourself, am I lusting after this person? And I think that much of the times what we are excusing as, oh, it's just a kiss, is actually much more than that. And here's one more thought for you before we move on. And why I say to avoid this, because when you start making out and doing all that stuff here, and this is not an option, you're in trouble. See, when you're 24 and you start to burn with passion, great, get married. That's why God made marriage, okay? I mean, so that we unite two people, that's great. When you're 16 and you're 9 years from being married, that's a bad place to be in. And that is a hard road that we're not meant to fight. So I would just give you this, avoid the rush. It doesn't have to be about physical things. Dating is not about that. It is about, making friends and learning, about a person and discovering whether or not they're the person for you to marry. Oh, no, okay, I wasn't supposed to say this, but it just popped into my head. So, don't we have to find out if we can connect physically? That's the dumbest thing ever, okay? Yes, you will connect, okay? I mean, it's not, people act like you gotta find out if you have the right, together. I don't even know what they're talking about. Like if you're a guy and they're a girl, it's gonna work. And, and then listen, if you find somebody that is loving and caring and they're a bad kisser, guess what? You can teach them, okay? When you're married, you can help them through it and they'll get better. And then we act like this is stupid stuff culture says. And, I gotta practice. I gotta make sure I know what I'm doing. Now, I'll tell you what, there is no husband that has ever said, I wish my wife practiced with a bunch of other guys before she found me. That has never happened in the history ever. And so don't listen to the stupid stuff people say about this to try and excuse their reason. So avoid the recipe. I should stick to what I plan to say. Okay, don't be alone. Don't be alone. What do you mean by that? Don't be alone. Okay, let me be more specific. If you're driving down the road in a car, you're probably pretty safe, okay? But here's the thing. If you're in a car parked in a parking lot with nobody around sitting in the back seat together, see, I had a friend and she came to me because I was kind of like the spiritual guy and she's like, I need your advice. I don't know what to do. And she goes, me and my boyfriend, we keep doing stuff we don't want to do physically, and we tell each other we're not going to do it, and then we do it again. And I said, well, where are you when this is happening? And she goes, well, after we go on a date, sometimes we stop at this place where we can be alone to talk in the car. We kiss, and it always goes further. And I'm like, stop going there. Okay, you're not. That's not going to be a struggle if you're sitting in the living room with your parents in the next room. You're not going to struggle with going too far if you're sitting in Starbucks. But if you're alone in your bedroom with the door closed, Lord, help us to not fall in temptation as we get under these covers together. I mean, that's stupid. It's never going to work, okay? And so you have to make this decision, never be alone. And here's the advice I gave to somebody who had been in a relationship before where they had done things that they did not want to do, and we're now into a new relationship, and we're saying, hey, I don't want to make the mistakes I made before, and I'm afraid that I am. This is what I said. Never kiss her in a place where sex is possible. If it's possible to do it there, you don't even kiss. So if you're like, I can never kiss her then. Yeah, when you walk her to the door, you can kiss her goodnight, and that's probably going to be all that you get, because you're not going to do it in the car, you're not going to do it in a house by yourself. In fact, you're never going to be in a house by yourself because that's stupid. And listen, I know all about it. When I was dating Tracy, this is what we had to do. We would go to Starbucks to watch TV because we wanted to watch shows together because it's expensive to always go to the movies. So we just wanted to watch stuff that was free. And so I had a house, okay, at the time, my own house. I lived in there all by myself. And I had a big TV. And we could go sit on the couch and watch Netflix, okay? That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to watch Netflix. We wanted to make sure, though, there was none of the chill part. And so we went to Starbucks, okay? And we sat in the parking lot and we watched right in front of the door and watched, we got your free Wi-Fi so we could watch movies. Why? Because we knew we didn't want to be alone, because when you're alone, you do stupid stuff. And you're like, wait a minute, weren't you like a youth pastor at the time? Yeah. And even me was smart enough to go, hey, I'm not going to handle that. I'm going to keep that not an option. So here we go. Don't be alone. I'm going to do the next ones really fast. Make pre-decision decisions. You need to decide and pray about and talk to God about what is right and what is wrong before you get there. And you need to decide before you even start dating. Because the time to decide what's right and wrong is not when you're sitting alone with a girl, sitting alone with a guy, and your emotions are going, blah, and your brain stops working. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And so you need to have already decided, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. That's something that's not going to be a part of my life. And in fact, I would even encourage you to have that conversation with the person that you are evaluating. And if they're not okay with those decisions, they just evaluated themselves out of that relationship, because you've got to be in somebody that's on the same page with you if you're going to follow God in that way. So I would even encourage you to get pretty specific. Maybe even write it down, then burn it so your parents don't find it. But like the things that you're not gonna do, right? And let me just be a little bit specific, okay? You should not touch anywhere that a normal swimsuit would cover. That will be lust. Lust is happening when you're doing that. Those parts are for their spouse. And if you are not their spouse, it's not yours. Now, when I was in a service just like you, I was a teenager, and the pastor said that, okay? It was my dad, okay? He was my youth pastor. So can you imagine? I always had the sex talk from my dad, okay? And so I'm up there, and he says it, and this guy in the back goes, "What kind of swimsuit?" And if you don't know my dad, okay, he looks at him and goes, "If that's your attitude, you're already lusting." Just called him out right there. Everybody was like, "Whoa," okay. Because this is what we want. And this is why I even hesitate to say this, because this is what a lot of people will do. All right, so I can picture a swimsuit, and actually I've seen some pretty skimpy ones, so I can picture that one, and now I'm going to get as close to that line as possible. That is not fleeing sexual immorality. If that's a line, then that should give you an idea of how far away you should stay. If in your mind you're thinking get as close, you know that you're already walking in lust, and you've got to deal with it before it takes you too far. Make pre-decision decisions. Decide what's feeding your fire and get rid of it. This is the last one. There are things in your life that are feeding this burning inside. See, for some of you, it might be just some songs that you listen to that always talk about sex, and just get that in your head. Some of you, it's shows that you watch. And you know what? And this is really hard. I have stopped shows in the middle of a series that I really liked because they started doing stuff that was just not right. And some of you may need to turn some stuff off. And it's hard to do because you want to know what happens next, but it's lighting stuff up inside of you. Some of you, it's kissing. And if you're honest with yourself, every time you're with that person and y'all start, something lights inside of you. And if you just keep going that way, this fire gets stronger and stronger. And listen, there's a reason he didn't say resist sexual immorality, because it is not something we're made to resist. It's something we flee from. So if you discover what some of these things are, and you think about it, pray about it, ask God, what is feeding this fire inside of me? Then he will help show it to you, and you need to get rid of those things. So I want to end with this thought. If you're in a relationship, or you're going to be in a relationship someday, listen, think about these things, make them a priority, and trust God with this part of your life. But in a room with this many people, there's going to be some of you who have already made a mistake in this area. And what tends to come in when we do something like this is guilt or shame, or like, are you saying it's too late for me? In fact, I've even heard some say, well, I've already messed up, so I'm already burned, I might as well just keep going. And listen, if you burned yourself, you wouldn't go, well, I'm already burned, let's just go ahead and burn, you just keep crisping it up, right? You wouldn't, no. You take your arm out of the fire. If your arm gets burned, you put your arm out of the fire and let it begin to heal. And so this is what I want to encourage you to do. Listen, God loves you. He doesn't love you any different than the person sitting next to you who hasn't struggled in that area but struggles in something else. He absolutely loves you and will begin healing you. But you have to turn away from what you're doing. You can't continue to do the damage and expect him to heal you. You've got to decide, I'm going to turn from that and trust him. And when you do, he'll begin healing you and be repairing your heart. And he can. I've seen it happen. He'll make you new. He'll take you to a new place. There'll be a season down the road, and it takes time to repair. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be tonight and tomorrow, but it's going to take time. But he will restore your heart and prepare you for that one that's in your future that you're going to marry. So, will you trust him with this part of your life?
Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, leave a comment down below or hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.